Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first live taping of Lore Watch.
Oh, it's fancy. We're fancy.
Fancy. I am joined by my stupendous co-hosts, and it's going to be, you already heard her, the wonderful editor-in-chief, controller of all things on the site, and, well, just an all-around swell gal, Liz Harper. How you doing, Liz?
Howdy. I've been playing some, you wouldn't guess this, but I've been playing some Dragon Age lately.
You know, it's funny you should mention that because I think Matt did as well. Matt, you're joining us as well today. How are you doing?
Well, for those of you who heard the unedited, not that great. I did play some Dragon Age. I actually ended up playing about 4 hours of Inquisition last night. And then I went and played another 3 or 4 hours of Dragon Age 2. And then I went and played Origins for about 15 minutes and was like, yeah! And went back to Dragon Age 2 for a while and then went back to Inquisition.
There's some wildly divergent kinds of gameplay between these three games.
It's not it's not that I don't like Origins, but it feels like a game that came out in 2008 because it is.
Yeah.
I think it feels older than that, but I'll go with you.
Yeah, it was definitely like getting a bucket of ice water on the face. Let's put it that way. But we're not here to talk about Origins just yet.
No, instead, we're actually going to be working in what Matt dubbed the most relevant order, and I think he's correct in this one. We're going back to front, so we're going to go for Dragon Age Inquisition first, which is the most recent game to release in the series. Now, I'm going to be looking to Liz and Matt to sort of take a little bit of the brunt of this, mostly Liz, because she has played through the freshest version of this compared to all three of us, and sort of go over, what are the key elements of the story. And the reason we're doing this is because, well, it looks like the next Dragon Age isn't vaporware after all, and is actually going to be coming out, and is going to be involved with the story that happened in Dragon Age Inquisition. So, sort of topical, really relevant. Liz, why don't you start out with our wonderful story about the Inquisitor? What happens at the beginning of Dragon Age Inquisition? What are the most important story beats there?
Well, the big thing happening in Inquisition is you've got this breach in the sky has opened up. And should I jump to the end, or are we talking this through from the beginning?
I think jumping to the end is not actually a bad idea for Inquisition.
I think it ties in with the beginning, right? It's sort of like is that weird loop? Yeah.
It's a circle. So if you haven't played Dragon Age Inquisition and don't want to know, you may want to tune out, because we are going to be talking about spoilers here. But if you want to play the Veilguard and you want to catch up on Inquisition fast, maybe this is a good way to do it, because we're gonna cover this. So yes, in the beginning, there's a breach in the sky. Your character is blamed for it because you have to get involved somehow, and that's a pretty good way to do it. But I mean, it's all a quest to untangle what is causing this and fix it. No one likes a hole in the sky, right? But the biggest problem is one of your companions through this journey, Solus, everyone's friend. I don't know.
My first playthrough was a female elf.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's rough. Solus actually helped the primary villain of this game open the breach by giving him this elven artifact in hopes of using it to tear down the veil. He thought he would give this artifact to our villain Corypheus and would thus achieve his goal of tearing down the veil, which he was the one who put the veil up and destroyed the Elven Empire, and now he's trying to undo his work through Corypheus, and in so doing, probably destroy the actual waking world, because the veil is what separates the world of demons and spirits from the real world. And it's heading towards chaos. I think the game is really interesting in how it lets this unfold, in that you spend the entire game Solus is he's just your elven buddy helping you out. He's got all this magical knowledge. He tells you so much elven lore, and
he sleeps with you.
He can, if you're an elf, if you're a female elf, yes, only then. And then in the end you find out he's actually here trying to destroy the world, and he accidentally made friends with you. or more than friends, and here you are. So now that really sets us up for Dragon Age the Veilguard, which is coming out at the end of October, which Dragon Age the Veilguard was originally called Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and Solus is actually the Dreadwolf. We find out in Dragon Age Trespasser, which was the last DLC from Inquisition. So it's been a long road getting there, but it's kind of a simple story when you break it down like this. Solus, the Dreadwolf, wants to tear down the Veil, and in doing so, might destroy our world, but it'll also bring back these great glorious days of magic in the ancient Elven Empire, and perhaps the Elven gods as well. I don't know.
Which he is actually really interesting for a lot of reasons. First off, is one of the things about Inquisition that I really like is that Solus is ignorant of a lot of things. He knows a lot of things because he's in contact with the Fade and in spirits in the Fade, but he's also ignorant of a lot of things. Like, for example, that Corypheus can't die.
Yeah, do you think that's intentional, like from like what's whispering to him in the Fade, or do you think that's just him being laser focused and just not paying attention to anything?
I don't think it's that he's not. I don't think that the things from the Fade are lying to him. I think that he's very aware of them and very experienced with them. He is not aware or experienced with the actual world of physical beings, because he comes from a world where there's no veil. He grew up in a world where the veil didn't exist, and there was no barrier between spirits and us. Like elves, in fact, there's a lot of stuff about this that cuts into a character who's in Dragon Age Origins and Inquisition. I don't think he pops up in. I mean, he's in Origins and 2. I don't think he pops up in Inquisition, but Sandal.
Yes, Sandal, he gets a couple of references in Trespasser.
Yeah, Sandal was this as a character was this strange dwarf boy who was found in the deep roads by a dwarf merchant named Bowden, and Bowden basically took the kid in and treated him like his son. And Bowden, he in return, Sandal loves Bowden like a father. But Sandal is very odd, and you know that from the first time you see him. He's constantly saying strange things you don't really understand. At one point in Origins, you just find him just before you go to fight the archdemon. You just find Sandal sitting there, just below the door to go up, and you're like, Sandal, what are you doing here? And why are all these things dead? and Sandal's like, yeah, shinies, and you can buy things and get enchantments and so forth from him. And in Dragon Age 2, the exact same thing happens. Sandal comes along on an expedition to the deep roads along with Bowden. And at one point, he just wanders off, and Bowden's like, please, my son. And so you go looking, and you find him with a whole bunch of Darkspawn who've been turned to glass.
Yeah, there's an exchange between Sandal and Bowden that I think is relevant here, because I think it's funny. So, like, to give you an idea of, like, Sandal and his powers and where he is, Sandal's basically, there's a dialogue thing where he says, one day magic will come back, all of it. Everyone will be just like they were. The shadows will part and the skies will open wide. Bowden goes, huh? What's that? Sandal, when he rises, everyone will see. Bowden, by the ancestors, what's gotten into you, my boy? Sandal, enchantment? Yep, that's more like it. Like, it's... Yeah. These moments of prophecy and like lucidity that creep in.
We should
later on in Dragon Age 2 to get back into what we're talking about, which is Dragon Age Inquisition. Several of the plot points of Inquisition are straight up prophesied.
Yeah,
Sandal including the entire revelation that Solus even exists and what he's doing is in one of his statements. He was watching me. I was afraid, and it talks about. There's a whole thing where you find out, as Liz said, that Solus is the Dreadwolf. He's Fen Harel, who's one of the gods, but not one of the gods. Like, he's both. There's two pantheons of gods among the elves. Do you want to talk about this one, Liz?
Yeah, well, I just want to say before you get into this that there's a little confusion, and I'm not sure if it's ever settled. Are the elven gods, or are they powerful leaders? Are they powerful mages who have set them up as rulers or god kings?
Yeah, and part of the problem is because the veil exists, we don't understand them properly because they lived in a world where the veil didn't exist.
Yeah.
So they could do almost anything, because a mage in the Fade is an incredible temptation for spirits because of how powerful they are there. And spirits want to possess them for that reason. That's why they're constantly trying to get through the veil and possess mages so they can use them to alter the world in ways that a spirit can't do itself. So when the veil wasn't there, it's very likely that the most powerful of the elven quote-unquote gods could basically seem like gods, because they could probably do practically anything.
Well, yeah, what is it, the saying that sorry, Liz, a being of any sufficient power is viewed as a god?
Well, it's similar to any sufficiently advanced technology is like magic. If it walks like a god and quacks like a god, it's a god. But yeah, Liz is absolutely right, and I think that's something to keep in mind. We don't understand half of the world before the veil went up, because there was a time when, as Sandal said, magic was everywhere, and nobody, like everyone. Even one of the things about elves that I think is fascinating is that I think. Well, we have to go on and talk about so many things to get to this, but I will say this much. I don't think elves, as we understand them, were physical beings before the veil came down. Mm. And the reason I don't think that is because of Cole, who is one of your companions in Dragon Age Inquisition, and one who speaks often to Solus. The thing about Cole is, Cole's not actually a human being. He looks like a human being, but he's in fact a spirit from the Fade who is essentially pretending to be human. He's come through. He didn't possess anybody. He is in a body. He grew his own body. And I think it is that process that has turned the elves from spirits into elves. And I think that's why when an elf and somebody else, some other species, have a child, that child looks human or looks like the other species. Because once they're the whole idea of the veil is this hard barrier, but it's also, like, as Solus suggests, it's a wound. He cut the worlds in half. They weren't supposed to be separate. He did this thinking it was the only way, and it made things worse because he was trying to stop the other elven gods from just, ruling like absolute despots. And that's a big part of the upcoming game, although I'm not going to spoil anything. But keep that in mind when looking at what's happening in the game. It's almost like the inverse of what happens in Inquisition, with the big tear in the sky and spirits going through everywhere. Imagine if you, instead of making a hole into our world, you punched a hole through into the other world. That's kind of what we're looking at. So it's important to look at, the origins of all that. So go ahead, Liz.
I'm way past my train of thought at this point.
I'm sorry. That's my bad. Do you want to go on to something else?
So that's up to you. That's up to you guys. What do you like? So you talked at the beginning, or the end of the beginning of this is the end. That whole.
I think we need to just lay out what Trespasser is.
Yeah, so, Liz, you want to talk about that?
Well, of course, you spend all of Dragon Age Inquisition building up the Inquisition. You are the leader of the Inquisition. You're building this giant fighting force to defeat Corypheus, close the hole in the sky, and. It's interesting because you go through the entire storyline not knowing a lot of things. You never see a lot of things, and you get to Trespasser. Trespasser canonically happens 2 years after the end of the game. The Inquisition has closed the breach in the sky, and they're still kind of hanging around, righting wrongs. And Ferelden and Orlais both think, well, this is a big army kind of on a doorstep. We don't like you. You don't serve a purpose. Ferelden wants to disband the Inquisition. Orlais wants to rule over the Inquisition. And it's this great exalted council deciding your fate. But in the background, because it wouldn't be a game if you just sat around doing politics all day, or it wouldn't be an RPG. There are, this is so complicated when you try to break it down. The Qunari have been watching what's going on in the south, and they have seen the breach. They've seen this great disruption of magic, and they've decided, actually all those southern mages, they can't handle this. They do not have a grip on magic. We need to go in and take care of this. And so there is a plot going on where the Qunari have infiltrated everything to plant bombs, essentially, at major capitals, at palaces, and kind of just plan to wipe out the rulers of Orlais and Ferelden, and clean up what they see as a mess of letting mages roam free and with all of their power. Someone's going to have to continue from there. I'm not sure where we're going here.
Okay.
It's a very tangled mess going on.
Yeah, and the other complication during all this is you find out that within the Inquisition there are spies. Because when you founded the Inquisition 2 years ago, you did it with the help of Solus.
Mm-hmm.
And Solus spent that time, while he wasn't, lying to you, recruiting a whole army of other people, mostly elves, who had been disenfranchised. Because in this setting, elves are disenfranchised and repressed. They are a society of people who are treated like they're kept in ghettos. Or the only free elves are the Dalish, and the Dalish, Solus doesn't like them because they think they remember the past, but they don't really. All they have are myths and legends that have changed over time. And so, like, one of the things is the Dalish hate Fen'Harel, and he is Fen'Harel, so he's annoyed by that. He's like they keep, the Dalish have face tattoos called Vaseline. They're literally put on their skin with blood. This angers Solus because that's how the king gods, the gods of the elves, marked their slaves. They put their own marks on their faces in their own blood. So he hates that. He hates a lot of things in the modern world because they're not what he expects or was wanting to be preserved. And that's a big part of the war here in this expansion is, as Liz said, Ferelden and Orlais want to either disband or take over the Inquisition. The Qunari want to just wipe out the South because they're nuts, and that's something that we see in a lot of other games. Qunari don't like the way mages go. I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead.
I mean, the other thing is, it's like the Qunari are coming in, and it does seem very unreasonable, but at the same time, a mage did cause this huge magical catastrophe. A mage started this breach in the sky. Solus led this off with this artifact that ripped open the sky, tried to tear a hole into the Fade. And, before that, we had Dragon Age 2, where you had a mage terrorist kicking off the Mage Rebellion. And, the Qunari live in a world that's very structured. There are rules, and you follow those rules. You live your life by the Qun. And that is, they look at the South and they see, this is not working. These people who don't follow the Qun, don't follow our rules. This is not working out. And Matt, you were just talking about how elves are kind of kept in slums. They are lesser citizens. In Kirkwall, it's the same thing. But the Qunari were in Kirkwall as well, and there were a lot of elves that converted to the Qun looking for a better life in Kirkwall. And we do learn in Trespasser that some of those elves became spies for the Qunari and joined the Inquisition, and they've been keeping tabs on us from the beginning and watching as we have tried to fight this and just all of this magic out of control.
It's also worth noting that the Qunari plot with the bombs, the Qunari are using elven devices. I can never remember the name of the thing. The mirrors.
Illuvians,
thank you. They're using these Illuvians to travel through worlds. And that's how they're getting into these palaces to plant the bombs without anyone seeing them. They're essentially using the Illuvians because there's Illuvians all over the place. And they're doing this with the help of their agents that they have already placed.
And
Go ahead.
I get the impression that they are using elven agents very significantly because
but at the same time, go ahead, sorry.
But in Ferelden, in Orlais, elves are servants. They're almost always servants. They're these lesser citizens. So an elven servant can wander around a palace and get into doors and do a lot of things without being seen.
Yeah, no one pays attention
you're not even
to
going to notice.
Yeah, if they're seen,
you're not going to notice another elf.
Exactly. If people see them, they think they're supposed to be there anyway. They're servants.
But we see the Qunari leveraging this to plant these bombs, but Solus leverages it too. He wants to help the elven people and bring them back to where they were, even though he's probably going to rip the world apart in attempting to do it.
Yeah.
But
the funny thing about it too is that Solus and the Qunari are fighting through their agents within the Inquisition, while you, as the Inquisitor, are trying to stop the Qunari and figure out what Solus is doing. And so you're basically told at one point, the big part of this whole story is that the Inquisition has to be disbanded because it's been too compromised. And that's a big part of why Veilguard even happens, because the Veilguard have to be formed because there's no Inquisition left after that. Should we just talk about how it ends?
Yeah, probably. That would probably be a good idea.
We've kind of done that.
Well, let's just run through what happens. The Qunari set off their plan. They get a couple of the bombs to get off, but you stop the rest of them. You face the Qunari mage who's doing all this, and she's rare in that the Qunari have let her keep her mouth. Most Qunari mages are chained and have their lips sewed together. They haven't done that to her. This mage can actually move around.
Which actually makes the mage prisons of the circles that we have in Ferelden and Orlais seem pretty reasonable by comparison.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But make no mistake, the mage prisons are still horrible. But you catch up to her, but she's ahead of you and she attacks Solus, who is basically stopping them from using the Alluvions this way because the Alluvions are sacred to his people and something he's very familiar with. She tries to fight him. He literally just turns her to stone. Like it doesn't even last a second. He just whoomp. Because at the end of the main story of Inquisition, Solus, having lost his orb, which contained his power, has to steal the power of another of the gods. Someone we know, actually, a character named Flemeth, who was in all 3 games. And Flemeth, it turns out to be, which goddess is she?
Mythal.
The mother one. Yeah, Mythal. Thank you.
Mythal.
Yeah. And so he takes... Go ahead.
So, sorry, I'm going to kind of continue your thought and go on my own. He seems to take Mythal's power, but the thing is that Mythal has just taken the power of another old god's soul. Well, I guess is that going to depend on your ending in Origins? That probably depends on how you ended Origins.
I don't think it does, because you can't have ended Origins without somebody either siring the child or dying themselves. And if they die themselves, remember, Flemeth has already had a chance to monkey with you, because you were unconscious right in front of her for a long time. So it's quite possible she got it that way. Because keep in mind that the reason, if you go in and die as a Grey Warden in the end of Origins, your soul and the Archdemon soul wipe each other out. But since she would have a hook in, she could then pull the soul through. But either way, yeah, I don't think... Go ahead, keep going.
This kind of gets complicated. So the archdemons, am I getting that right?
Archdemons, old gods are called archdemons when they're blighted.
Yes. Yeah. So it's when you have a blight, it's because the Darkspawn have found an old god in the Deep Roads and corrupted it with blight. That becomes an archdemon. But inside there's still an old god soul. In Dragon Age Origins, potentially Morrigan captures this soul and puts it into her son through various ways that I'm not going into. And in Dragon Age Inquisition, you meet her son, Kieran, and Flemeth wants that old god soul and takes it. I think, at least, I think in most of the playthroughs I've done, that's how it's happened. So
she either takes it or she straight up is given it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like
so
cases, Kieran just gives it up.
We don't know who that old god is, but Flemeth has absorbed that god, and now we see Solus absorbing Flemeth. So Solus potentially has the power of he himself is Fen'Harel, and now he potentially has the power of 2 more elven gods, which we don't understand. We don't know what their powers are. We hear a lot of myths about elven gods, but we've never really met one. We've met Flemeth, but even she admits she's kind of an echo of Mythal. She doesn't have Mythal's full power.
Well, that's the interesting thing too, because we see Flemeth put something in the mirror. When we see the very end of Inquisition before Trespasser, the end of the main story, we see Flemeth talking into the Alluvion, and she puts something in it, like a glowing thing. So she might have actually put Mythal's essence into the mirror and let him take the Archdemon's essence. I'm looking up which Archdemon it was, by the way. We can actually know. They know exactly who it was. But I haven't looked at the wiki in a long time. Sorry, guys. So, which god was that? It's Urthamiel. So it is the old god Urthamiel, god of silence. So keep in mind too that the Dragon of Beauty, or the god, this is who Urthamiel originally was. The dragons are how the Tevinter people worships them. And that's another thing that goes into Veilguard. The Tevinters, who are the mages who have been fighting the Qunari for all this time, their entire society is built on the back of the elven society that Solus essentially destroyed. They found the ruins, they used the magic, and they worshipped the elven gods as dragons. And so when we see one, they're usually in dragon form. And we're not entirely sure which dragon associates with which elven god, or even if they are, because there were two pantheons of elven gods. And we don't know if the dragon ones are, the ones that Solus was involved with or not. But we do know that Mythal, aka Flemeth, with Mythal in her, could turn into a dragon at will. And once somebody joins in with her essence in Inquisition, they can turn into a dragon or control a dragon. And that's part of the whole weird, this is all myths that we don't know anymore because the veil split the world in half and we can't tell for sure. But we know that god, their essence, it might have been in Flemeth, it might still be in Kieran. Either way, he might have taken the power but not the essence. Because we don't even really know how this works. We know that Flemeth was an enormously powerful mage even without anything else. Because she's been alive for longer than any of the other Mythal hosts. And her daughter Morrigan, who might be next in line to be Mythal, is also ridiculously powerful. So there's a lot of weirdness, but basically we get past the part where Solus turns the Canary into rock, and they have a confrontation with the Inquisitor based on their relationship with the Inquisitor. A lot of different things can happen. Liz, do you want to talk about it generally, and then I'll talk about specifics, or do you want to just go?
You go for it, because this is the part that I have not played again.
Yeah, in fact, I just played this last night, so I'm still mad at him.
Yeah, I mean, you can stay mad at him for a long time.
The thing is that every time I replay, I get mad all over again. My character, as I mentioned, I was playing a female elf. I was playing a female elf Dalish mage. He basically, during the time that Solus and my character were interacting, he told me a lot about the Fade. He basically told me that my Vaseline were like slave marks, and convinced me to let him take them off of me, which basically severs me from Dalish culture. And then he dumps me because we're getting too close. So it's like, you stole the markings that made me who I was to my people, and now you're just gonna bounce? And that's what he did. That. But then you go to the end fight with Corypheus, and you're fighting Corypheus, and Corypheus dies in that fight because you figured out how to kill a darkspawn. You basically have to destroy its soul, and you've worked out how to do that by killing the dragon that he's got with him, because he put part of his darkspawn essence into this dragon to create a parody of an archdemon. That's the weakness. That's how you manage to kill him. But in the so doing, he drops the orb that he used to create the rip in the sky. It turns out he had no idea how to use it in the first place, which was all Solus's plan. Solus says, as Solus sees it broken, he falls down and he's like holding the broken pieces. And he goes, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." And you're like, "Beg pardon?" And he relates to you that he is in fact responsible for all this, that he gave Corypheus the orb, and then the orb was supposed to destroy Corypheus. He didn't realize that Corypheus would just come back from being destroyed. Any body nearby that happened to have the taint in it from the Darkspawn, he would just come back, just like an archdemon does. And that's related to a bunch of different kinds of Darkspawn that'll come up again in Origins, and we'll talk about later. But for right now, when Corypheus finally dies and Solus reveals what he's done, he just leaves. He's like, the orb destroyed. I can't do what I need to do. I need to find a way around this. Go ahead, Liz.
I do not remember it going like that. Is there an ending where he will tell you everything right there?
He tells me quite a bit. I don't know if he tells you literally everything, but when you go into Inquisition now, when you go into Trespasser, that's where he tells you everything.
Yeah.
Especially if you're his ex-girlfriend. Because you go up to him and your hand is during Trespasser. The other thing that's been happening is the mark that you get at the beginning of Inquisition that links you to the rip in the sky. Ever since the rip in the sky has been gone, it's been eating you alive. And the reason it's eating you alive is because, as Solus points out when you finally catch him, that's his power. It wasn't supposed to be put in you, and so it's killing you. And he can do a lot of different things. But in this particular version that I played through, he's like, you're like, "Look, I love you," and he's like, "Yes, I love you too, and that's why I can't let you see what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do to this world will horrify you. I'm going to destroy everything you know, everything you've lived your whole life doing. I know it's wrong. I know it's awful, and I'm going to do it." and I can't let you watch me do it. But he does save your character's life, except your character has to lose their hand. He literally, your arm stops at the elbow when you see the Inquisitor later, because he had to literally take the hand off in order to keep it from killing them, which implies that he got his power back because he took the hand with the power in it with him. It saved your life, but it also gives him back that power. And at the end of this, Solus is basically revealed as the engineer of everything that you've gone through. And even if you're just, Joe Schmo and not his ex-girlfriend, he still feels bad that he betrayed you. Even if you're not an elf, he's like, you got your life back. Live it. You're going to have some time before I finally destroy this world. Go be happy. Don't try to follow me, because you won't win, and I'm still going to destroy this world. Just spend the time, cherish your family, live as best you can, because the clock is ticking. And he walks off, and that's he walks off like a mage / potential god does. He doesn't just walk off in the sunset. He goes through a magical portal and he's gone. But that's the that's the climactic ending of Trespasser. And with that, the Inquisition is disbanded, because at this point it is just way too corrupt. But it's only disbanded on paper. Like the top 10 or 15 members stick around, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be what Veilguard is built around.
It would make sense, right? Cause just based off of what they lived through, what they had to go through, where the story leaves off, having the highest ranking members who, in theory are not corrupt, or are less corrupt. I'm sure there's going to be some twists in there somewhere, because, well, it's a fantasy story. Let's be honest. It would make sense that they would, sort of fall into that role. So
yeah, well, plus, we know from the previews that at least 2 members of the Inquisition show up in the beginning parts of the game, Varric and Scout Harding. Both of them, by the time of Trespasser, at the end of Trespasser, when you see the Inquisitor and a bunch of people get together in a cellar and say, we're still going to be doing something, they're there. They're in the room when that happens. So that's why I think that it's very likely that the Veilguard is built out of the ruins of the Inquisition. I heard Liz make a noise, but I didn't know what you were saying. Sorry.
You do need to be aware that if you're going into Veilguard, we are not playing with the same characters. This is taking place. We do have some carryover, but it continues the sort of Dragon Age theme where every game you're playing a new character. You're not just... So it's like we ended Inquisition, and it's like, okay, well, all of us buddies, we have a new threat to face, and even if we aren't the Inquisition, we're gonna face it together with the power of friendship. But that you aren't going to be the Inquisitor in Dragon Age Veilguard. And there are a couple of carryover characters, but for the most part, the team is completely new. It looks like all of your companions, except for Harding, are new companions. And of course, Harding wasn't a proper companion in Inquisition.
No, she was not. That was just me agreeing with you.
What I find most interesting about Inquisition is how little you know going through the game.
Yeah, and how you're constantly being lied to by someone.
Yeah, there are a couple of big liars in here. Primarily Solus. It's very interesting if you go back and early in the game, you can ask Solus about Corypheus. You can say, what do you think about Corypheus? He gets real defensive. He gets super defensive. Why do you ask me about that? Because I'm an elf? He goes off on you a little bit. And it's like, I'm just asking because you seem to know a lot of stuff. And he kind of calms down. But it's like, going back, you see all of these warning signs in Solus that you did not originally see. And I really love the way they told this story, because you've got your basic story. Okay, we're going to fight Corypheus. We're going to close the hole in the sky. We're going to save the world. But there's this whole other story going on in the background where Solus is trying to tear down the veil. And of course, he's asking you to activate these elven artifacts that will strengthen the veil as you travel around Thetis, which I'm now a little tiny bit suspicious about activating all of those. So you can go back and play it again. You see a very different game because there's a lot of subtext. There's a lot happening in the background, and the entire story of it is very backloaded. You find out most of this stuff. You find a little bit out in the Temple of Mythal. That's where you start getting more Fen'Haral stuff and suggestions that Fen'Haral and Mythal had some sort of connection. and that Fen'Haral may not have been such a bad guy. You know, he's thought of as a trickster god, but you see these statues of Fen'Haral in these places of prominence in the Temple of Mythal, and you kind of start suspecting, okay, there's more to this story, but you don't find out until you get to Trespasser, and it just drops a boatload of elven lore on you as you are chasing down the Kunari through, not quite the Fade. When you pass through the Alluvians, you get into this crossroads area, which is sort of halfway between here and the Fade.
Yeah, it actually also seems to have pre-existed before the Fade. Like, there's a lot of times where you basically find out that the Alluvians existed before Solus created the Veil, and when he created the Veil, he ripped the network apart. There's like a library that you go to where the librarian is dead because of what Solus did. Like, he's been ripped in half.
The library was, it was an elven creation. It was held together with magic.
Yeah, and it was held together in half in one place and half in another. Like, there were it's really interesting.
And it's just, the thing is, you get this glimpse of a world that was when magic was everywhere. Now magic isn't everywhere. And when you go into these places that were suffused with this elven magic before, they're wrecked because the world that allowed them to exist is gone. With the veil put up, they didn't have the magic to sustain. And you find so many elven ruins, and that's why you have so much fragmented knowledge. Why the Dalish just have bits and pieces of their history, and most of them are false.
Yeah, and also something Solus even admits is that before he put up the veil, elves were immortal. Because they never died. They didn't even have a concept for death. It wasn't until he put up the veil that elves began to die, because he had cut them off from the source of their immortality. He'd made them mortal. He created mortality, which is why I think, going all the way back to Origins, I think the Golden City that supposedly the Darkspawn were created from, I think that's possibly a prison for the gods. And I think it's the entire religion of the Chantry is based around an understanding that is false. That they think that they thought the things in that city were the Maker. But the Maker, if it's even existing as a being, doesn't interact with mortal beings. So they went in there and released them into, I think the Blight might in fact be one of the elven gods. And that's why it seeks out other dragon gods and corrupts them.
It's interesting that you see how history has changed, how history remembers things has changed over the course of ages in Dragon Age. Because you look at what the elves are today. You look at the elves in the Alien Ages, or the Dalish elves trying to carry on their culture, and there are huge misunderstandings of it. Because late in Inquisition, you find out, in the Temple of Mythal, you find out that, the elves kind of destroyed themselves. And you learn more in Trespasser about, these elven rulers that were keeping slaves, elven rulers, maybe gods, maybe mages, whatever they were. And they were just these all-powerful beings that ruled everything. Solus wanted to end that. He wanted to free the slaves and let them rise up against their masters. He wanted all of the elves to be free and have power in their own right. And that's what brought the Veil up. He created the Veil thinking he would free the elves from this tyranny of these powerful god kings. And instead, he wakes up in this world, the modern world, where elves are second-class citizens at best. The Dalish live a nomadic life, remembering
and if they stop anywhere too long, they get, into trouble.
Murdered. Yeah, murdered by humans usually. And they remember scraps of false history, which they cling to desperately. Or elves live in alienages, which are slums in the cities, and are treated like second-class citizens, servants at best, and it's just Solus sees what he's created, and he sees that it needs to be undone. And now he is willing to do anything to accomplish that, even though it will destroy the world we have. It's just very interesting. You've got a lot of depth in Solus, and a lot of depth of story. The story has like the layer of the story where you're first playing through Inquisition, and then there's kind of another layer of subtext you learn if you play through again, and you kind of see, oh, so this is what's going on with Solus. And then there's a whole nother layer in Trespasser where you learn this larger story of elven lore. And then if you go back again, it plays differently because you know the context of all this elven stuff. It's very interesting. It's a game designed for replayability, which is probably how I've sunk 1,000 hours into it.
We haven't even really talked about the other two DLCs, which both have an impact on this as well. Descent is mostly about dwarves and what's up with dwarves and what lyrium is and all that. But there is a hint that one of the things that might have powered or fueled the elven gods on their rise to whatever they were was the same thing that creates the lyrium underground. The thing that lyrium is a magical element that we see in the Dragon Age games is how mages can repower themselves after they've used their magic. And lyrium is literally... Go ahead.
It also fuels Templars' power. So it's
the Templars,
kind of a source of a magical essence.
Yeah, and they can use it. The Templars, who are not magical themselves, can use lyrium to effectively suppress magic. Like they drink a bunch of lyrium and they can actually create these energy fields that stop magic from working. But in Descent, one of the things you find out is that you can trace all lyrium to these things called titans. These enormous entities, so big that you can find yourself inside them before you even know you are. It's like you going underground and suddenly, we're in a very different kind of cavern. No, you're actually inside this entity, this enormous thing. And its blood is lyrium. And its blood, like at one point, Cole even talks about this in Inquisition. He talks about how like the singing under the mountains can put its song over the world's song. And that's what the blood of the Titans allows people to do. It allows people to impose their will over the will of the world. Essentially, that's kind of how magic works. And there's an entry that Mythal found one and enslaved it. Now, we don't know what that means. And we don't know what enslaved it means, or for how even what finding it means. But that's there. It's a mention in Descent. In Jaws of Hakon, there's a dragon that's been possessed by a spirit. Now, the fact that it's a dragon means it's possibly related to the elves right away. The elven gods take on dragon forms. But the really interesting thing is you find out that during the time after the fall of Erlathon, there was Arlathan, which was a smaller, kind of a resurrection of some kind of elven kingdom, because when the Chantry got founded, the Chantry basically respected elves for a while. Like there were elves who helped them in their rebellion, so the elves were respected, and until it suddenly became disadvantageous for the Chantry to have elves questioning them and to have elves with like entries in the chant that said, no, you can't oppress elves. They helped us get free. And the first Inquisitor of the original Inquisition, you meet him, and he's an elf. He was important in the Chantry. They put him there to be the Inquisitor to help root out demons and keep mages from going too far. And he was an elven mage, because back then elves and mages were treated with more respect. And so it's really kind of trippy when you meet him and he's like, what's the world like now? And you're like, oh yeah, all your friends are dead and you've been trapped here for a couple thousand years. Oh, and yeah, and nobody, like, elves are kept in slums now. And he's like, and when you're there, Solus is with you if you bring him. And at one point you find a temple with both relics of the Chantry and of the Maker, and I can't remember her name, Andraste. They have relics of all those, and then they also have relics of the elven gods, or at least some of them. And Solus even comments on them. Like he's like, yeah, so-and-so, that he was a jerk. And you're like, what do you mean he was a jerk? Well, in the myths he was a jerk. Yeah. He's a real mean guy.
Solus does a lot of that. After the Winter Palace, you've been to this whole ball. Solus talks about, wow, I missed being at court. And you're like, what? And he's like, oh, I've seen lots of memories in the Fade of, palaces and courts and ballrooms. It's like, when you hear that the first time, you let it slide. When you hear it the second time, it's like, really?
Yeah, In a lot of ways, Inquisition, narratively speaking, is like a drop hitting the water. And as it hits, you expect the initial, responses of water, a drop of water hitting like the surface of a lake. Yeah, you get the little sploosh, but the ripples that come out from it go on for a much longer than you might expect, and they hit on all sorts of little fragments of the setting and of the setting's history. By the end of it, you realize that a lot of things that you didn't even know you knew were not true. Like a lot of stuff about Tevinter and its rise, a lot of stuff about elves and how they ended up the way they were, the fall of Arlathan, the relationship between Andraste and her elven disciples. All of it is different than what you were led to expect. And I think that's really, it's kind of a metaphor for the concept of illumination through, study in a way, like the idea that you can learn more, and the real picture is almost always more complicated than you think it is. And the person that the Dalish think is like the devil who sealed away two different groups of gods might have actually been doing it to help them. So, and that's, yeah, go ahead, Joe.
No, I'm going to interject here just because we're coming up on that time where we're probably going to, we got maybe 10-ish minutes before we need to close it out. So I guess with everything, what's the most salient story points that we need to know from Dragon Age Inquisition going into the next game? What have you gleaned from your recent replay that are like, let's distill it down. Let's go with like a couple of the big points that you think people should really know.
Liz?
Yeah, we're going to start with Liz.
I mean, the whole setup is you've got Solus trying to tear down the veil, but you have to remember he's doing it because he was trying to help people. He sees creating the veil as a huge mistake that he wants to undo. And he's willing to do this at all costs. So that's where you're coming in. You're coming in chasing after Solus. And probably the most important thing you can take away from Inquisition is his motivation. Why are we here? Why is he here? Because he's not this faceless maniacal villain. He is a pretty deep character who has done something terrible in the past and is trying to right it through terrible means. But all along, he's been trying and failing to do something good, and he's continuing to try and fail to do something good, I think.
Matt?
I think just that the story you're given when you first start, don't be too quick to trust it. I think one of the things to really keep in mind when you play any of the Dragon Ages, but especially this one because it's coming up after Inquisition and it feels like it's preserving some of that idea, is that the immediate threat is not the thing that's actually going on. It's not it's like when the Darkspawn were rising in Origins. Yes, the Darkspawn looked like the immediate threat, but there was also a bunch of other stuff you had to deal with just to get to the point where you could fight them. In Dragon Age 2, it's this whole mage Templar fight thing that you always aware is a problem, but they keep presenting you with other problems to keep you distracted, including, I think, originally the whole storyline with Corypheus was supposed to be inside one of those acts instead of a DLC. But in this one, in Inquisition, you know that the big hole in the sky is the real threat, but it isn't. Solus is the real threat. The whole time you are trying to fight the big hole in the sky, that guy is next to you, trying to essentially get back what he lent out so he can try again. And you foil him by accident. I want that to really be the thing to hold in your mind for a second. When the Inquisitor beats Corypheus, they foil Solus's plan because Corypheus drops the orb and it breaks. If he hadn't done that, go ahead.
That's actually kind of interesting because at the beginning of the game, Solus talks about how he wants to recover the orb and study it. And you're like, well, it did, the whole temple collapsed on top of that orb. And he was like, well, but it's an ancient elven artifact. A temple falling on it isn't going to destroy it. But then at the end of the game, Corypheus drops it and it cracks like an egg.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to add to that.
I'm sorry, I didn't hit my button properly. I think it's sort of more that Corypheus was using its power the whole time. He was using its power to call that dragon to him. He was using its power to amplify his own. He was using its power to try and destroy you. I think when it breaks because he drops it, because he's sucked all the life out of it. But on the other hand, maybe it is just like, oopsie, boom, you thought this thing was going to endure the temple falling on it. It broke as soon as he dropped it. could be that too. I don't know. And I think it's kind of funny to imagine that if we hadn't killed Corypheus, he might have got the orb back from him, and then he would have been able to continue on with his plan. So yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing else to add, I don't think. Are there any other points or anything else that we want to highlight that from Dragon Age Inquisition that are important notes before going into the next game?
I mean, I think the biggest thing about Inquisition as a game is all of the characters you meet. And of course, that's sort of the sad part of moving from one Dragon Age game to another. You don't see a lot of the same characters. This will be the third game we've seen Varric in, but only... So it's built this whole cast that you've made friends with all of them, and now you have to move on. So I'm always a little regretful to play a new Dragon Age game, because it's like, I love you guys, you're my best friends forever. Now I gotta leave you and foil this next huge plot on the world.
We were best friends. Now you'll go into the forgot box. Like,
yeah. Well, I think part two, like, it's also connected to how your character changes because you play a different person each time.
Yeah.
So in a way, you also have to leave behind the character. I had the hardest time playing Inquisition because at one point Hawk shows up, and I'm like,
it's weird.
Hawk is here.
That's
I remember
me.
Hawk. That was me. Yeah. And I honestly, like, why don't we just have Hawk handle this? Like, Hawk is really good at doing this kind of thing. We just have Hawk do it.
Cassandra fights with Varric about that at some point too, saying, I was looking for Hawk, thinking she would help us, and you hid her from us. And really puts it on Varric for not bringing Hawk sooner.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of that too. Like the fact that in 3 games now I keep hearing about the original Warden from Dragon Age Origins, but I still have never seen them again, and we don't really... There's always something about how they're trying to cure the blight or whatever.
Yeah,
they never show up.
That's an interesting thing too I always thought about it, and they kind of talked about it a little bit in the books. But part of the problem too was not only are they trying to like cure the blight, but the original Grey Warden originally kind of had like an expiration date on them, right? Like,
yeah, they still do. Except
for one of them, because wibbly wobbly fantasy things. But the question is, like, and I'm always curious if we'll ever see the original Warden pop up again. Like, will they, especially with like the stuff that's happening now with the world ending stuff, will the blight be tied up in this at some point too? Because there does seem to be, and we'll talk about this eventually when we get back to, when we work our way back to Origins, and I think I'm going to put both books into that as well. Because there's a lot of stuff in there that sort of like ties into did the blight come from the Fade? Is it an artifact of the world being severed? Where is all these things happening, and does it tie into it? So a lot of people, and I've seen this a lot everywhere, are kind of curious if maybe we'll get a glimpse of the Warden in the next game, even as an NPC that we have to interact with. And maybe we will, maybe we won't. But that said, there's a lot here, and an hour is not enough to talk about Dragon Age Inquisition. There's so much between the main storyline and the DLCs.
We barely got to even talk about the Temple of Mythal.
We didn't get to talk about the Temple of Mythal. We didn't really go into the deep dive of the Fade. We didn't go through the individual acts, which, the first act, or the epilogue starts, it's called The Wrath of Heaven for a reason. Go ahead, Liz.
Like, it's interesting that we've covered what we feel are the most salient points to the next game. And in doing so, we've actually skipped over a huge amount of the game, and including a lot of parts of the game that I think are really fun highlights. Frankly, we could probably do a whole episode on Grey Wardens, because they're in a very uncertain state by the end of Inquisition 2, and there's some loose threads, and I don't know if we're going to pick them up in Veilguard or not.
I mean,
we at least know there's a Grey Warden in Veilguard, so we will at least get that much.
Yes, which is why that's why people are speculating that we'll get something of the Grey Warden. And when we say the Grey Warden, we mean the one that you played during the original Origins game. So,
if they aren't dead.
If they aren't dead, which they might be dead, or they may have become a monstrosity. Who knows? Maybe all the Darkspawn were really them at the beginning. Who knows? We'll talk about that at some point. Ooh, mysterious. Yeah. But I think that's it for Dragon Age Inquisition. Highly encourage that you go back and play it if you have the time between now and when the next game comes out. Play the DLCs, spend the time going through it. It is definitely at a place where, and usually at a price point where it makes sense to grab it and kind of play through it. It is a really entertaining time. The story is a lot deeper than maybe some of the other Dragon Age games in almost every aspect. Not all, but almost every. So it is well worth your time if you can catch it on sale.
For that matter, just quick, if you have Xbox Game Pass, you can just get it. It's free. You just download it.
I totally forgot about that. It will require you, if you're playing it on the PC Game Pass, you'll have to have the EA account, and I think it utilizes the EA launcher as well. So you'll have to.
No, there's an app that you can add to the Xbox. I just did this. You can add that to the Xbox thing, and then you can just download it straight from the Xbox game thing.
Even better. Look at that. All right then.